Chapter 27, Howe Billy wished France wouldn't join in. Oh my god, that is a horrible pun. I'm sorry to spring that on you. I didn't write it. That was Joy Hakem. She wrote that. That was... Oh, okay. The general's name is William Howe. Get it? Howe Billy. Oh god. Yeah. All right, so what we're finding out now is you're going to see the Americans are losing a lot. The British are winning almost every battle. And we're going to really study when we win. Yay! It's kind of true because the British were winning most of these big battles, but they could never capture Washington's army. And we say, like, so what? Well, that's a big deal. Because when you capture the army, that's kind of it. It's over. And what Washington did was guerrilla attacks, sneak attacks and leave. And he had two very successful ones in Trenton and Princeton in the winter of 76, right after all these big defeats. And these were important. While they were really almost minor victories in a sense, we captured a Hessian army and won a battle in Princeton against English forces, I believe. And there were sneak attacks on Christmas and New Year's, like when everyone was supposed to be celebrating. The British weren't ready to fight, and same with the Germans. They were celebrating Christmas. And these sneak attacks really matter because you can read it in the newspapers of the time. They really inspired Americans to keep fighting. If they hadn't won these battles, it might have been the end of the war because a lot of the troops were going to go home and they didn't think we could win. And the same with the people. They were feeling really depressed. And these wins really kept America's hope alive. So they become more important than they really were because of the significance of the wins. So it's more than just only celebrating America's wins. These were actually important because of that. And then we're going to learn also in the same chapter, these should be separate chapters. But we're learning about Saratoga as well, which isn't even really a battle. It's where they surrendered. It was a lot of little battles, and they just kept happening in the woods, and the British just couldn't handle it, and they had to surrender. They had to surrender. We took their troops. That was a complete loss. And the big thing about this win is it really caused France to go, maybe they can win this if we help them. And it led France to join the war. That's the big deal there. Saratoga was also big for the rifle usage. What was happening is that they were wandering through the woods of Canada down into America, and we had sharpshooters with rifles in the woods. And whoever was leading them, in the beginning it was Native Americans, they were being shot. Not because they were Native Americans, because they were helping the British leading them. And they all went home. The natives went home. They were like, yeah, no thank you, because they were just being picked off. And then the same thing started happening to the British officers and the soldiers. They didn't know, they couldn't catch these guys. They were far away, shooting through the woods like they were hunting deer. And they were being very successful. And it just scared them. And that was a big factor of the American rifle. Not using just a musket, but a gun with a groove barrel that spins it like a football or a baseball when you throw it, and it allows it to go further and straighter. Okay, so there's my lesson. Now let's do the book lesson. Okay. Sir William Howe, who was sometimes called Billy Howe, was in charge of all the British forces in America. It was Howe who drove the American army from Long Island to Manhattan. Then he chased it across another river to New Jersey. And after that, he forced George Washington to flee on to Pennsylvania. It looked as if it was all over for the rebels. In New Jersey, some 3,000 Americans took an oath of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, like you do. They had to pledge allegiance to the king. But Washington got lucky again. The Europeans didn't like to fight in cold weather. Okay. this is true, but it's also for a reason. Joy either doesn't understand war, doesn't want to, or just conveniently leaves it out. Armies fighting in war, that's a big problem. You have a trouble supply line, getting food, getting clothes, because you can starve and die out there and freeze. The British didn't want to do that. Many armies have tried to fight in winter in Russia, like Hitler in Germany and Napoleon of France. They fought in the winter and lost. I mean, that was it. So it's a dumb idea to fight in winter. So it's not insane or lucky the British didn't want to fight in the winter. It's not a good idea. You can lose a whole army trying to do that. So, okay, sorry, I had to divulge that information too. Sir William settled in New York City for the winter season. Howe thought Washington and his army were done for and could be finished off in the springtime. That's what he thought. That's true. Probably likely. Besides, Billy, Howe loved partying. And some say he liked the Americans and didn't approve of George III's politics. For reasons that no one is quite sure of, General Howe just took it easy. General Howe is known to have agreed with the Patriots, but he won every battle he fought for. Like, he really tried to win. So I think that's silly. They stayed in the winter. Now, he did like to party a little. That's true. But George Washington was no quitter. Okay. On Christmas Eve of 1776, in bitter cold, Washington got the Massachusetts fishermen to ferry his men across the Delaware River from Pennsylvania back to New Jersey. The river was clogged with huge chunks of ice. You had to be crazy, or coolly courageous, to go out into that dangerous water. While the Massachusetts boatmen were getting the army across, the Hessians on the other side, at Trenton, New Jersey, were celebrating Christmas by getting drunk. Yeah. Not a good move. Before the Germans could focus their eyes, they were prisoners of the Americans. A week later, Washington left a few men to tend his campfires and fool the enemy. He quietly marched his army to Princeton, New Jersey, where he surprised and beat a British force. People in New Jersey forgot the oaths they had sworn to the king. They were patriots again. Those weren't big victories that Washington had won, but they certainly had helped American morale, and American morale needed help. It still didn't seem as if the colonies had a chance. After all, Great Britain had the most feared army in the world. It was amazing that a group of small colonies would even attempt to fight the powerful British Empire. When a large English army, 9,500 men and 138 cannons, headed south from Canada in June 1777, many observers thought the rebellion would soon be over. See the picture of what General Burgoyne wanted to do. He wanted to march down, have some Native Americans come this way, and William Howe to go up this way. Well, the Indians got fought off. William Howe decided to go to Philadelphia instead of helping him. So I'm going to go conquer Philadelphia instead. That is not an insane move. That's okay. But it left him hanging. So now he's got his army all alone coming down here. The army was led by one of Britain's most colorful officers, General John Burgoyne. Burgoyne was known as Gentleman Johnny. He was a wild character, a drinker, a gambler, actor, playwright, and a pretty good general. He said, "I've always thought Hudson's River the most proper part of the whole continent for opening vigorous operations, because the river, so beneficial for conveying all the bulky necessaries of an army, is precisely the route that an army ought to take for the great purpose of cutting the communications between the southern and northern provinces. In other words, you could cut New England off from everyone else. And it's a sound strategy. Which means, in ordinary English, if Burgoyne could capture the Hudson River area, he would cut off New England and New York from the rest of the colonies. Burgoyne made careful plans. His army would go south around Lake Champlain and the Hudson River, heading for Albany, New York. Sir William Howe was supposed to come north along the Hudson from New York City to Albany. Another British army was expected from the west. Burgoyne planned to trap the American army like an insect squashed between three fingers. Then he and Howe could march south together and mop up the rest of the rebel forces. Things didn't go as Burgoyne expected. General Howe decided to head for Philadelphia instead of Albany, and the Western Army got involved in other battles and never made it east. Nevertheless, General Burgoyne went ahead with his plans. He sailed down Lake Champlain and recaptured Fort Ticonderoga, the fort that Ethan Allen, Benedict Arnold, and the Green Mountain Boys had taken. In London, there were wild celebrations when that news arrived. King George yelled, "I've beat them! I've beat them!" Yet, no. Overestimating the importance of Fort Ticonderoga. Then Gentleman Johnny went on to Fort Edward. When the Patriots saw him coming, they abandoned the fort. But they found another way to fight. They cut down trees and threw them all over the roads. That slowed the British Army and the wagons and the heavy cannons they dragged with them. The Americans sniped Indian style from the woods. Those small guerrilla attacks kept the British soldiers on edge and scared. And so not only did they snipe, but as the book says, when they cut down the trees and made them go slower and slower, that made them easier targets to shoot at. So it was a mess. Burgoyne began running low on food. When he learned there were food and horses in Bennington, Vermont, he sent some troops to get them. That was a mistake. His men got whipped in a battle at Bennington, but finally the British Army reached Saratoga, New York. And there Burgoyne faced a big decision. Saratoga edges the Hudson River just north of Albany. General Horatio Gates was in command of the American forces at Saratoga. Gates placed his men on a high bluff overlooking the road to Albany, where it squeezes between hills and river. Colonel Thaddeus in English, Kosciuszko, I guess in Tadeusz Kosciuszko, okay, a Polish military engineer serving with the Americans, had picked the site and fortified it with cannons. That gave Burgoyne a difficult choice. He could march his men down that treacherous road, or he could fight the Americans on their fortified heights. He chose to fight. What happened? Farmers poured into the area. Soon the American force was 3 times the size of Britain's army. The American farmers were sharpshooters, and their rifles were deadly accurate. The battle wasn't even close. The British lost about 600 soldiers at Saratoga. American casualties were about 150. On October 17, 1777, the incredible occurred. The great General Burgoyne and his whole army surrendered. The European soldiers were marched to Boston, made to promise they would not fight in America again, and sent back to England. The Americans were jubilant. At last, a fast ship sailed out of New York Harbor heading for France with the word of the victory at Saratoga. This was just the kind of news Ben Franklin was waiting to hear. Franklin had been sent to France to ask for aid. The French admired Franklin, and they had a grudge against the British. They'd been fighting England off and on for hundreds of years. They were still mad about losing the French and Indian War. But they didn't think the colonists had a chance against Great Britain. No one wants to support a losing cause. The victory at Saratoga changed everything. It got the French to join the war on the American side. France sent gunpowder, lots, and soldiers and ships. They sent uniforms too, by the way. The next time you see a Frenchman or Frenchwoman, you can say thank you or merci. We might not have won independence without French aid. We wouldn't have won without French aid. So you can say that. But the war wasn't over. There was still much hard fighting to be done. All right, so we're kind of about halfway through the Revolution, and Saratoga really changed the game. Trenton and Princeton kind of kept it going, and we lost many battles in between there that we're not naming because we don't have time. There's Brandywine and a lot of battles. But then when they won Saratoga, that kind of turns. We have a chance now. All right, and we'll find out more tomorrow. Bye.